We're going to kick this thing off. So welcome, gentlemen, to Northern Highlands Sports. My name is Lee Johnson. I've been coming to the store since I was 7 years old. I'm currently 48 years old. So parents got divorced when I was 7, and Dad always brought us up here, and this kind of became like church to me, so to speak. So a bunch of the guides back in the day, Tommy Swanson, John Schulte, a number of the other guides used to call me mini guide. So I really enjoy fishing. It's one of those escapes I think that all of us share, as a pastime up here especially. So I guess what I'm going to do today is I'll break down. I've kind of already asked a few questions in regarding, if you guys want to go around and just introduce yourself, your first name real quick. Tom.
Paul.
Steve. Jim. Thanks for coming out tonight, you guys. I guess we'll go through, and the way I'm going to kind of structure this is kind of starting in shallow water. We'll go over the different types of lakes, that are prevalent in the area, and then working out, kind of your mid-level weeds and transition lines. And then obviously for certain lakes around here, you can go pelagic or go out into open water and be very successful for walleye. So there's a ton of different techniques. Obviously, there's a ton of different lures, rods, reels, and you don't have to have the best stuff. And there's a lot of stuff that we carry in the shop that's kind of multi-purpose in regards to rod blanks and then obviously reels. And I'll highlight one particular reel that I use quite a lot, and you'll see it on many of my rods. So, like I said, I've been working here now 10 years in the shop at Northern Highlands Sports. One of Janie's original disciples, if any of you have been in here for many years. Janie has not been with us. She's moved on for about 4 years now. But I kind of looked up to her as an older sister, and obviously she kept my interest in fishing. There were often times my dad had to yank me out of here to get out on the water. So I guess we'll start with shallow weed fishing. Shallow weed fishing is very prevalent early in the season, and we're starting to kind of transition as water temps are getting into the mid 60s now and upper 60s. We'll start to establish a thermocline, which all of you are familiar with. Once the water hits 69 degrees, there's a thermocline that starts to establish throughout the lake basin, so to speak. So, as summer progresses, that thermocline will get deeper and deeper depending on how warm of a summer we have, how windy it is. One of the most effective tools that I like just to kind of cover that going out over into deep water is an underwater camera. The one thing that's key about that, it's more prevalent during ice fishing. What I like to use it for in the summertime, though, once those temperatures do start to get above 70 degrees and that thermocline establishes, I like to drop it down in a calmer part of the lake and find how deep down that thermocline is. That typically is going to, when I hit 69 degrees, I'll mark that at 12 feet, and I'll go down maybe another 2 or 3 feet, and it'll be down to 65 degrees. So you'll establish that area where the most dissolved oxygen is within the water column. From there, temperature, 2 feet below that's going to be dropped down to probably 55 degrees, just 2 feet lower than that. So go ahead. So it's got a depth and a temperature sensor on them. So not all of them have that. Typically, you're going to pay about $150 for one that does. We typically carry them in the wintertime. So it's just one thing, if you guys are struggling, especially the middle of summer, really important to be able to know what that optimum level of oxygen is in the water. That's going to be where a lot of the fish are, at that, maybe slightly below it if they're holding to structure. Okay. But kind of backtracking a little bit, going into shallow fishing in the weeds in spring. And throughout the summer until the water gets really, really warm, a lot of fish are going to be in that cabbage. Anywhere you can find green cabbage in a lake is key. So obviously early in the year, there's a lot of dead weed material. It's those fresh cabbage shoots that start to come up post-spawn that really attract the walleyes, okay? It provides oxygen, it provides cover for bait fish that they're feeding on. Favorite setup for shallow water jigging, and it doesn't have to be anything this fancy, is going to be a 6.5 to 7.5 foot light action rod. Favorite jig, talk to a number of the other guides. They really like the 16th ounce slowpoke jig. Okay, we carry them in the shop, number of different colors. If you're experiencing some wind, Okay, let's say you've got a spot lock trolling motor on your boat, or you're just anchored up with 2 anchors. This is something you can cast downwind, and as long as you're keeping subtle pressure on it, it's an inline jig. So as it comes through the weeds, it's less likely to hook up on those larger cabbage stalks. I rarely ever use a slow poke in more than 1/8 of an ounce. Typically when I have an 1/8 of an ounce slow poke on, I'm getting into my phase of moving out into the mat weeds, your coontail, your elodea, which is also known as walleye weed by a lot of the guides, and it's more of a drifting scenario. So if you're unfamiliar with lakes, one of the most successful techniques that you can do is cover water. Okay, number of ways to do that, either drifting or using, if you have, a kayak, or if you have a trolling motor on your fishing boat, is just to kind of pop around and work some of those cabbage beds. Start fishing the deep edge of the cabbage, but don't be afraid to dive in deep to that cabbage. And even up until, the middle of July, when water temps are hitting that 75, some of the shallower lakes, it may be close to 80. So I always like to start shallow, especially in the early part of the season, May, and then leading into June as they start to slide out into those mat weeds, and then even further out onto those transition lines before they, by midsummer, middle of July, end of July, then you're going to start to see if the lake is big enough, the fish will slide out to some of that harder structure, those rock bars, those sandbars out deep. Another one I always get teased about in the shop, you'll hear me use the term sandgrass a lot. Sandgrass, there's basically 2 different types, and one actually isn't an aquatic plant, it's a type of algae. So sandgrass in the shallower lakes and some of the basin lakes, I'm very familiar with the Star Lake area. Partridge Lake has a lot of what you would call blade grass. It only gets 19 feet deep. So going into lake classifications moving forward, you've got your basin lakes. Those are going to be lakes that are under 25 feet, mostly a mucky bottom, lots of weed growth, some bulrush along the shore, cattails, often surrounded by parts of shoreline that are swamp. Move into your next, which I would call kind of your mixed lakes. Those are going to be lakes that get anywhere between 25 and say 50 feet deep. Obviously deeper water, you're looking at, probably some more structure, having some rock bars and stuff, maybe an island on the lake. And then you've got the really large lakes, your big punch bowls, white sand, fence lake, trout lake, obviously down here, which is, typically kind of a walleye factory. North Twin over east of Phelps, I live in Eagle River, another huge walleye and perch factory. So we'll break down a couple of other techniques. We're going to start shallow again. So that's the 16th ounce slow poke, a light rod, 7 foot, size 2500 reel, obviously is pretty typical. Thing with reels and line, we'll cover that briefly too, to kind of intro going into as we move through the whole lineup of my rods and my rigs. I typically am shallow water going to use a 6-pound fluorocarbon. You can go monofilament as well. I fish a lot of clear lakes. Dingier lakes, it's not as critical to have fluorocarbon. So I typically will buy an extra spool through Matt's Reel Repair over in Eagle River. He's not only a personal friend, he's on my FedEx route as well that I drive 5 days a week. So 16th and 8th ounce slow pokes. Again, the 16th is more for spot fishing. Number of different colors. In your clear water, I like your purples, your blues, your blacks. You get into your dingier water, your stained water, you're looking obviously at your oranges, your fire tigers, your chartreuse, your lime green, stuff that pops out, your pinks. Chartreuse and pink tend to be one of those 2 colors that kind of go either way. They're really good in clear and in stained water. So moving out into a little bit deeper water, and again, we'll still incorporate once I get into the Lindy rigging aspect of the seminar here. This is a 7.5 foot medium light rod. You'll notice that the tip is still nice and light, but then the backbone loads up pretty quickly. So one of the things I suggest to people in life is to buy yourself one good medium light high modulus graphite. So I obviously try to support local. St. Croix, this is a Legend Elite series, so that's an SC5 N6 graphite with a carbon wrap on it. So ultra sensitive. I often tell people this is something, no matter how deep a water you're in, you can feel a walleye breathe on your red-tailed chub when you're jigging it. So another thing that I do to increase sensitivity, and what I tell people on your one samurai sword, so to speak, when you're walleye fishing, go to a braided line. Okay, your Spectra type lines, obviously low stretch. And then I'm using an Albright knot, which is something, if you haven't ever done it, it's not very difficult. The key to the Albright knot is that the braid encompasses the fluorocarbon tippet. So you'll see here, this I've fished with a little bit recently, so it fuzzed out a little bit. But I'll just go around and kind of give everybody a little bit of a look. It's a tiny knot. Normally I sear that, but I've been fishing with this so much. So it's a very easy knot to tie. It looks complex, but like I said, I'm running anywhere from 6 to maybe 9 feet of fluorocarbon. I'm typically running like a 10-pound braid. Some of my favorite brands, number one would probably be Power Pro Super Slick version 2. They make it in high vis if you have trouble tying knots and seeing line. They make it in a high vis as well. I usually run the green on it, but pretty easy to tie it. You're basically creating a loop with your fluorocarbon. You're going to run your braid through that, pinch it and run along, back wrap 10 to 12 times, back through that loop, moisten the knot, bring it down. You trim the knot on the top side, leave about 3/8 to 3/16 of an inch of that braid, the bottom about an 1/8 inch of fluoro. Thing that's great about that, it still flies out your rod guides, plenty for a cast. The important thing about that Albright knot is that when it comes through your rod guides under load with the fish on, okay, that braid encompasses the fluorocarbon, almost making it like a slick, like a slick liner, okay? And that little tab of your braid folds right through your guides as they're under load. So when you're fighting a fish with that Albright knot, much less of a chance of a fish having a tensile strength break. If you get a big female walleye on, typically if you're fishing deeper structure, even in the weeds, but when you're fishing deep, you guys have probably all had this where you get a walleye that hits in deeper water on the edge of a rock bar and you feel that hammer or just dead weight and it's not moving. So that's yeah. So typically as well, what I'm doing with my tippet, if I'm running 10-pound braid, I'm going to drop down to an 8-pound fluorocarbon. So I'll grab something out of one of my jig bags real quick. That is a good question. I am a big fan of Seagar. Seagar is the original maker of fluorocarbon. For those of you who don't know the technology behind fluorocarbon, fluorocarbon has the same refractive quality as water. So it basically disappears in the water or appears invisible, okay? In the clear lakes up here, the glacial lakes up here, very important. So the Seagar that I had Matt bring in about 3 years ago now, you'll notice a lot of those fluorocarbon tippet spools are only 25 yards. Suffolk has one that's a 33 yard for whatever reason. The price point on those is typically somewhere between $10 and $13. It's pretty pricey for 25 yards of line. So, one of the things here at Northern Highland Sports that we try to specialize in is having more knowledge, having more details, getting the products in that are going to give you more bang for the buck, okay? And Matt's been really great in working with me and also the manager, Dave, and other fishermen and other guides, in the area, trying to bring products in that are working for them so that we can inform people that this stuff works. We're more of a customized shop versus a big box store. So the Seagar, what I call orange label, is called STS Floral Leader Material. It stands for salmon, trout, and steelhead. So it's a 100-yard spool. So for doing tippets, if you want to tie Lindy rig leaders or little leaders for your slip bob ring and stuff below your swivel, it's great stuff. It's level wound as well. So that's another thing to look at with quality of fluorocarbon leader material is if it's level wound, there's not going to be any twists or any indentations in that line. So that is a very high quality product, and it comes in at the price point of $12.99 for 100 yards. So we usually just carry this in 6, 8, and 10. It's more for the walleye and smallmouth fishermen. So we've got that in the store if you guys are looking for it. Also, we do carry a number of braids. Your Super Slick by Power Pro, we carry by the pack. We do have some of the Seagar Smackdown, which is another great line. They make that in a stealth gray and a high vis green. Both excellent. When I'm fishing Trout Lake, I will actually switch my line out to that stealth gray because it doesn't profile up into the light as much as that green does. So I just had a sand net fly in my eye. And I apologize for my allergies and the wildfire smoke from the Canucks north of us. So, all right, so still shallow weeds, okay? Another technique in the shallow weeds that we can use and cover water, if you're unfamiliar with the lake, is your typical bullet weight and then some type of a smaller weedless worm hook. Now you can run a drop shot worm on there. You can run a smaller, like a little twister tail for crappies. You could run a slow death hook with half of a night crawler on there. Okay. Then what you're dealing with is either drifting, but more likely using your trolling motor to just cover the deep edge of the cabbage, or even running right on that transition line from that cabbage down to your coontail and eladia, getting some waypoints out, on your graph. If you guys are unfamiliar with, go ahead.
What's your technique?
So the technique with this, typically when I'm unfamiliar with the lake, but I know there's fish in the weeds, but they're very scattered, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically, just kind of give this, I usually run about a 18 inch to 24 inch leader. I'm basically just going to kind of give this a toss out, maybe between 20 and 30 feet. And then I'm using my trolling motor to maintain a speed of anywhere from like 0.5 to about 1.2 miles an hour. So what you're doing is, okay, I don't know where the fish are in this lake. I'm not marking much. I'm going to start covering some of the weed beds where the fish can hide. And certain grass obviously can pick out fish better. Certain grass will just do sonar straight down. So we'll get into
What do you think depth are you at?
depth-wise, you're probably going to want to be in anywhere from, say, 6 to about 12 or 14 feet of water typically. So, and then obviously if you're running one line on the shallow side of your boat, you'd probably want to go with an 1/8 ounce sinker. On the other side, you could go 3/16 or quarter, just to drop your bait down into that target zone over those mat weeds a little bit more effectively. But that's something that you can do. And obviously, as you're trolling, and then I'll go into highlighting this reel and why I like these Daiwa reels so much. But as you're trolling, I basically will keep my rod back at about a 30-degree angle. The thing I like about this, and I'll introduce one of my favorite reels, I think I've got it on about half the rigs over there, is the Daiwa M-Cast. Matt just brought this in this year. I'm pretty sure he ordered another 6 just for the seminar today. But it's a $100 price point. So $99.99, you get a reel that has a really unique function. I used to use some of the Shimano rods and reels. Their rear drag has a paddle system. So you're not necessarily going to hit that exact fighting drag from your drifting or your slip bobbering drag, okay? So the mechanism in this that I wanted to highlight today, and one of the main points of the whole seminar, is anytime you're anchored, I'm sure plenty of you have been slip bobber fishing, and you leave your rod over the side of the boat. Maybe you've got a nicer boat with rod holders, right? You set that line out, and if you don't have a rod holder, if you do, every once in a while a fish will take your bait, they'll feel it, and they'll spit it. Or if you don't have rod holders, a bass or a walleye will grab it, and the next thing you know, your rod's getting launched out of the boat. The thing that's great about this, it has a completely separate fighting drag, okay, compared to what's called your bait running drag. Okay, so that's your bait running drag with that lever up. That is controlled with this knob back here. So it allows you, if you're drifting or if you're slip bobber and you want an ultra sensitive, ability to be jigging with one rod, maximizing your potential in the state of Wisconsin, we can have 3 lines per person. So whether you're in the boat by yourself or you're just, out in the pontoon taking a little cruise, that allows you to set that as loose as you want it or a little bit tighter if you're drifting. Okay, and we'll get into Lindy rigging in a little bit. When you're drifting, you can tighten that up a little bit so that as that little weight's tickling the tops of the weeds, it won't let line out, but it'll let you know when a fish hits. You'll hear that as an audible to go, oh, I have a fish. So the way you engage the completely separate front drag on there is either by just starting to reel or obviously manually flipping that little switch on the back. These things are worth their weight in gold. Daiwa. So it's called the Daiwa M-Cast BR, so bait runner, and it's the LT 2500. Okay, so obviously I've got my fighting drag set, and then you have the option, shallow water applications. It holds approximately 100 yards of 6-pound test if you want to just go monofilament, and keep it on the more economical side. About 75 yards of 8-pound test. So it's kind of that 6 or 8. Fishing panfish, you can use these rods as well to fish panfish, walleye, bass, northern pike, you name it. So great reel. Obviously the 2 separate fighting drags. The drag rating on here is another thing that I look at why this is quality. It comes with a max 22-pound drag. A lot of spinning reels this size come with anywhere from a 7 to an 11-pound drag. So one of the things, the final point I'll make about the Daiwa M-Cast reel, comes with 2 spools. Okay, that used to be very prevalent back in the day, up until like the mid 90s, where I'm buying Shimano because it comes with 2 spools. The great thing about that is I typically run mono or fluoro on one, and then the other one I'm going to run a braid. Okay, so if I'm using a light rod, I'm going to go 6-pound fluoro. If I'm using a medium light rod, I'm going to go 8-pound fluoro or monofilament. When I'm going to braid on a medium light rod, I'm typically going to be using a 10-pound braid. On a medium rod, I'm going up to 15. So it's kind of compensating for how much bend I have in the rod. I'm going to up my rating of line. Okay, another thing you'll notice about a lot of my rods is the length. I typically never fish with anything under 7 feet, and I typically never fish with much over 8. So I'm a big fan of 7 to 7.5 foot rods. Now, why is that? I can downsize on a slightly heavier blink and still cast a semi-small jig for that rod a country mile. Okay, I also am going to get more pendulum effect when I'm setting the hook, engaging that fish's mouth for a better hookup percentage. So again, just to do a little review on that, just the bullet weight, keeping it super simple. If you're in a lake that has a lot of northern pike, one of the things you can do is you can look at our Cortland toothy critter inside. It comes in 10, 15, 20, 30-pound test. It is a tieable micro-braided stainless steel material with a green nylon coating over the top of it. So that's another thing I can touch on too. Obviously, walleye fishermen, all the lakes up here have northern pike too. Okay, so that's something product-wise that we have inside. If you have any questions or are interested in that, I can point that out after the.
How do you have that through there?
So it's basically, this is a swim bait, okay? And I basically kind of hook it through at a 90-degree angle, and then I'm going to run it up through the belly. Usually pinch it back, run it up through the belly, and I'm running it up into that little chamber in the top side. You wonder why I had the headlamp on, right? Sucks getting old. So, and then I'm just burying that point. So that bullet weight will come through the weed streamlined. This bait will come through streamlined, and a fish hits that. And then that soft plastic comes like this. Oftentimes when you're fishing plastic worms, if you've experienced this with bass, whether it's smallmouth or largemouth, that plastic will shoot up the line and the hook will be sitting there.
Some people have the hook exposed the whole time.
Yeah, you can use like, yep, you can do it with a jig head too. So this is just something that as you're trolling, if you slow down a little bit, it allows this to kind of flutter and be a little bit more natural looking.
Like this? Are you doing the up and down
Nope.
technique, like balancing it? Or?
Nope, I'm just basically holding it back maybe a foot above the water at a 30-degree angle backwards. And as I start to see that line tick, I can give that fish a little bit of line, let them get it into their mouth, and then it's a reel. Okay, so what I'm doing when I'm setting the hook on that, it's a reel and a sweep. It's not necessarily a huge hook set, but once that rod tip loads up, I'm reeling. Once that rod tip really starts to load, boom, then I'm going to give it a final 2 to 3 foot swing up to about 10:30 or 11 o'clock ahead of me. Okay, rod-wise, anything that you guys have is going to work. I'm more inclined to tell you techniques versus products, but if you haven't looked at these, you can research them online. The Victory Series by St. Croix Rods. Again, Park Falls, Wisconsin. I try to support local businesses as much as possible. They have a Victory series. It's a bass-centric series, so they also have a Avid walleye series. They're the same exact length, slightly different color, but very similar actions, okay? The 7'3" and the 7'10" are the two lengths that I focus in on. They come in medium, light, and medium. This happens to be a medium light. So the thing I like about it, SC3 graphite with the carbon wrap. So you're looking at a nice light tip. It almost is a borderline light action at the tip, but then obviously you look at it and it loads up very quickly. So price point of that's right around $200 or $210 for most of those blinks. So a $300 combo, is it expensive? Yes. The thing I love about that 710 medium light, probably the most versatile, best bargain for the buck in our shop. For $200, you could jig with this, drop shot. If you wanted to slip bobber, you could. You know, you can do techniques like this. It's got that nice length of 7'10", but a very, very versatile rod. So it's one of those things, depending on what your budget is, something to consider picking up if you want just an all-purpose rod going into that. So that's just kind of your more of a trolling, you know, just covering some ground in an unfamiliar lake. I'm gonna take a little sip of water here.
So when you're fishing the weeds, are you trying to stay like in the top part of them, or do you want to go down and up?
Typically in the cabbage, now I know why I brought this. Typically in the cabbage, what you're doing is I tend to run like the deep edge of the cabbage if I have an idea where it's at. You'll be able to see it. So another key, obviously, polarized sunglasses can be very important for fishing as well. We carry plenty of those in the shop. I'm typically looking at being 2 to 3 feet under the surface. Okay, so if I'm in 6 feet of water, I'm probably only going to run a 16th ounce bullet weight. If I run one straight out the back, let's say I've got 3 people in the boat, I'll run one off of this side with the 16th ounce, one right back down the middle. And granted, you don't have your regular engine on, so I'm not doing it in the prop wash, but then I'll run a 3/16. So it'll be 16th, 8th, 3/16, and I'll try to ride that edge. And you'll be amazed, you know, even with that little slow death hook with a chunk of crawler, you'll catch crappies, bluegills, perch, bass, walleye, occasional pike will hit that as well. Trolling. So trolling in the state of Wisconsin is, you know, it's always been a sensitive subject with some of the guides. It really allows you to get a bait in a target zone, okay, and keep it there. So instead of casting out and having this, you know, pendulum type effect of your bait getting down into the water column and then coming back up, and it's only in the target zone a third of the time, is addressed by trolling and other type of techniques that we'll get into here. Let me think about this. So let's kind of move out from cabbage. So I'll just briefly touch on slip bobbering. That's an example of, you know, your high vis line. Slip bobbering, obviously everybody's familiar with it. You can use regular little plastic bobbers if you want to keep it simple. Obviously you've got soft plastics, jigs, plain Aberdeen hooks with a split shot. Sometimes the best thing is to keep it simple. These little VMC moon eye jigs, love them. Thing I like about them, 32nd and 16th ounce. This is a 16th ounce. Probably the #1 weight jig head if I am slip bobbering that I'm going to use underneath the slip bobber. Even if I'm out over 40 feet of water and the fish are down 25, or if I'm in shallow cabbage. So there's some weedless options.
With that small of a hook.
Yep. So clear water, especially with walleyes, they can be super finicky. So a big hook, perch, obviously, for people that have caught perch, you feel that little, you know, little peg, peg, peg. Bluegills, it's like a machine gun. It's like a, you know, it's like a give a fish a Red Bull and then you've got a bluegill. It's like a machine gun, hitting your crawlers and stuff like that. But that's something, you know, you can throw just an 1.5 inch chunk of crawler on. I like that little bait keeper on there. And then obviously for little fathead minnows and stuff like that, you just hook them up through. So it's sizing your hook to your bait as well. So, you know, your medium leeches, if I were to use like a huge jumbo leech, I would probably go either bare hook or maybe size up to a 16th ounce jig that has a little bit bigger hook. So that's the last technique really in the shallows. So you have your 16th ounce slow pokes, you know, keeping just that little bit of pressure on it so that they come through the weeds. Obviously, your trolling technique, and then slip bobbering is obviously very popular as well.
So when you're slip bobbering, are you basically just posted up? You know, you got your
Yep, you're either
anchor up,
anchored or
and you're just mark the fish are there. You can see them, and you're just gonna let it
yep,
go down and just
yep, could be
sit
cast.
there. Are you thinking it?
Yep.
Are you
So typically, in regards to shallow water in weeds, you know, you may have lily pads coming out to cabbage. You may have structure. It may be a little drop that comes off and you're just looking at a flat with some cabbage, or it could be timber along the shoreline. So typically in those scenarios, slip bobbering, I tend to be anchored up, whether you're using the old, you know, anchor and line tied to your cleats to the backside of your boat and setting up that way, or these days, technology obviously has come a long ways. They have the spot lock trolling motors. Still have that on. Sorry, I'm blinding people. But yeah, so, and you know, it has the jog ability. But those spot lock things, I tell people, if you're looking to get into fishing or if you are fishing, you don't need the fanciest Luna Lumacraft, you know, Ranger, Tuffy. You don't need a fancy boat. I tell people, put your money into a decent graph, like a 7 or 9 inch screen, whatever you want to do, but a 7 is pretty common. You can get into something like that. I also recommend side imaging is, you know, we'll touch on that a little bit as we're moving out here into the weeds for locating fish. Down imaging and sonar. So basically, other than, and I don't even want to touch base on any of the live imaging, I think it's ruining fishing, to be honest. It's turned into a video game where you can point and go, oh, there's a 50-inch muskie. And cast at it. So sonar obviously is typically what I run. As we get out from the weeds and start looking more transition lines, bottom hardness composition coming from sand down into the, you know, a basin into muck, into mud, as the guides call it, then I'm using down imaging. Typically I'm running just my sonar. And then obviously side imaging can be a really, really good tool. It takes a little bit of work to finagle, and I can always meet up with you guys separate. You can get my contact information through the shop. Side imaging is one of those things this time of the year, as those water temps are in that mid to upper 60s, traveling along weed lines and using that side imaging to look for these little bright crescents. But the thing that denotes it even more on your graph with the sensitivity adjusted property is just a little shadow behind it. And you'll see pods of fish in just a little, see there's just like a little bay in the cabbage, and all of a sudden you see a pod of fish sitting there. So technology is obviously come a long ways. So side imaging is one of the things that I use a lot, anytime from opener until usually about the end of June when the fish start sliding out, you know, deeper and deeper, you know, out into the weeds and then out beyond that. So slip bobbering in shallow water. Now let's move out to kind of your more of your mat weeds, your coontail and your elodea, and then thirdly, depending on the lake and its clarity, there's the other form of sandgrass. And if Matt was out here right now, he'd probably scream drink. I have to buy him a drink every time I say it. So, but that sandgrass is actually called chara, C-H-A-R-A, chara. It's a type of algae. It looks like dillweed in your garden. I fish Star Lake, white sand. A lot of lakes have this chara, especially the clear ones that are, you know, in that 30 to 100 or more feet of water. Very typical. It holds a lot of bug life. Obviously, we're looking at getting in as we get out further from these weeds. We'll kind of move on as we get through here in about another 10 minutes into fishing the dreaded bug hatch in June. One of the most difficult times to catch any species of fish. Okay, so we'll